It was around 10:50 p.m. on September 9th, 2016. 911 service got a call from a woman who was completely panicked, hyperventilating, barely able to get words out. And then, just like that, the call cut off. The dispatcher felt something off and traced the phone's location to somewhere near Kenner, right around the coordinates 25.95. It seemed like she was on the move, probably running. First responders rushed to the location, an old rundown county road in the middle of nowhere. It was pitch dark and the road was barely drivable. When they got there, they spotted a woman frantically waving them down. To their shock, she was totally covered in blood, from her shoulder down to her legs, much like a horror film heroine. But why? What kind of horror she had been through? Definitely someone's been murdered brutally, but who did that? You see, questions are many, but answers we need to find out. Her name was Chasey Poynter, and the first thing she asked over and over was about her husband. Dispatch was immediately told to send more backups. Chasey, still in shock, struggled to get her words out, but she kept repeating his name, Robert Poynter. And then she said it, he was dead. By midnight, more officers arrived. They walked up to a Jeep that was smeared in blood, though strangely, there were no signs of a struggle. Only inside, slumped in the passenger seat, was Robert Poynter. He was a respected fire captain. Chasey kept asking if he was still alive, but there was nothing anyone could do. He was already gone. The whole thing looked suspicious from the start. A remote farm road in Royce City, Texas, tire tracks in the mud, deep ruts from vehicles that barely passed through. Detective Michael Burke took it all in, making notes. Because it wasn't just another tragic death, there was something wrong that wasn't adding up. Sergeant Shane Meek sat with Chasey in the back of his squad car. She was a mess, shaking, out of breath and out of words. Between sobs, she tried to explain what happened. She and Robert were supposed to meet up at a fast food place, but somehow they ended up on this broken, unfamiliar road. Chasey said she had missed a turn and texted Robert that she was 3 miles away. Then her Jeep got stuck. She called Robert for help, and like any good husband, he came right away. But his truck couldn't handle the rough road either, so he parked and walked to her. That's when everything went downhill. According to Chasey, Robert was trying to help her with the Jeep when, out of nowhere, he was shot right in the head. She panicked, jumped into the Jeep, and tried to put it in the park while holding his head in her hands, feeling his blood as he slipped away. But the shot wasn't just any random shot, it was a close-range shotgun blast, straight to Robert's temple. And when Sergeant Meek asked if she saw anything, Chasey mentioned a tall, shadowy figure in the trees. But that was it. No details, no real description. Definitely, this last part in her story just didn't sit right. A decorated fire captain gunned down on a deserted road with only his wife as the witness, a mysterious figure lurking in the trees. Chasey kept insisting she didn't know why anyone would want to hurt Robert, but Sergeant Meek wasn't convinced. There were too many questions, and the deeper they dug, the more twisted the truth became. Robert Poynter was the kind of guy you'd want in your corner, whether you were fighting a fire or just needed someone to talk to. He spent nearly 2 decades as a firefighter at the University Park Firehouse near Dallas, dedicating his life to helping others. His co-workers, Jason, Paul, Earl, and Mark, still feel the sting of his absence, especially when they walk past his locker, knowing he's never coming back. That was just the kind of man Robert was. Even in the middle of a crisis, he had a way of making people feel safe. Like during his last fire, there was this terrified little girl, and instead of rushing past her to do his job, he knelt down, reassured her, and made sure she knew everything was going to be okay. He had 3 daughters, Natalie and Nicole, from his first marriage, and a 6.5-year-old with Chasey. Meant everything to him. Despite the demands of his job, he always found a way to be there for them. But life has a way of getting messy. In 2008, after 20 years of marriage to his high school sweetheart, Amy, things started to fall apart. The signs were there. Robert was quieter, more distant, and gone from home more often. Then Nicole, his daughter, found something that confirmed their worst fears. A second phone. And with that phone came another woman. Her name was Chasey Tyler Mormon, a 20-year-old nurse aide who met Robert through a friend. He told her he was separated, and whether or not she believed it, she didn't hesitate to pursue him. By December 2007, they were seeing each other. And by May 2009, Chasey was pregnant. That same year, she and Robert got married, him at 40, her at 22. It seemed like a fresh start, but even then, cracks were already forming. Fast forward 7 years and things had gone from bad to worse. Their marriage was crumbling, especially when it came to the custody battle over Chasey's daughter. And that way came the night of September 9th. Chasey was frustrated and angry. And then just hours later, with her husband's blood still on her hands, she was telling Sergeant Meek about their problems, about how Robert had threatened to take her daughter away. She claimed that would have hurt her more than anything. She said their marriage had started falling apart after just 3 years, that Robert had grown cold, distant. She believed he still had feelings for Amy. And then there were the accusations. She said Robert was on testosterone and steroids and that they made him violent. She painted a picture of a man who lost control, who threw her against the wall, who lashed out in anger. But not everyone bought that story. Robert's ex-wife, Amy, called it total nonsense, and she said his testosterone treatments were completely normal, and the whole roid rage thing, a lie. Robert's daughter, Natalie, also backed her up. She had lived with them when she was 16, and according to her, she never saw her father lay a hand on Chasey. No violent outbursts, no fights, nothing. She was convinced Chasey was making it all up. So what really happened that night? That's the part that still haunts the people who knew Robert best. Natalie and Nicole, along with other family members, weren't buying Chasey's story. They had their doubts, and Natalie, in particular, thought Chasey's accusations were more about personal grudges than the truth. She believed Chasey had a hard time accepting that she had basically taken their mother's place in their father's life. Chasey, on the other hand, had her own reasoning. She claimed she stayed quiet about the alleged abuse because she didn't want to cause problems for Robert at his job. Even though their marriage was far from perfect, she tried to hold things together and even worked on herself in the process. Over 2 years, she lost 104 pounds, and this transformation made her feel powerful. With her newfound confidence, she started meeting other men and getting involved in multiple affairs, mostly through online chats. Natalie eventually stumbled upon explicit messages on Chasey's Facebook account, which had been left open. It wasn't just the messages that raised red flags. Chasey had a habit of disappearing for hours during Robert's night shifts, leaving Natalie and her younger sister alone. She'd tell Robert she was headed to the gym, but Natalie noticed she rarely dressed the part. And on those nights, her little sister would wake up crying, looking for their mom, only to realize she wasn't home. Eventually, Natalie decided enough was enough. She confronted Robert and told him she suspected Chasey was cheating. That revelation hit Robert hard, so hard that he even filed for divorce, but in the end, he didn't go through with it. Robert had already been through one divorce and was desperate to keep this marriage together, especially for the sake of their third daughter. He wanted proof of Chasey's infidelity, so he set up a security camera by the front door. Then just 12 days before his death, something strange happened. The doorbell rang, triggering an argument between them. Chasey told Robert to leave, and he stormed out of the house. Despite everything, Robert still loved her. The night Robert was killed, Sergeant Meek was first to feel something was off about Chasey. Her behavior just didn't sit right. When they read her rights and started questioning her, her answers felt rehearsed, like she was trying too hard to keep her story straight. Eventually, she admitted to being involved with a guy named Michael Garza, someone she met on Facebook back in 2016. She claimed he was her emotional support, but as the investigators dug deeper, things got more suspicious. Chasey confirmed they were having an affair, even admitting she felt guilty about it. But at that point, guilt wasn't enough to explain what really happened that night. Robert had been venting to his buddies at the firehouse about his marriage for a while. He wasn't happy, that much was clear, but at the same time he wasn't ready to walk away just yet. He still had hope. Maybe things could get better. That's why he took Chasey and their daughter on a trip to Mexico, hoping a little getaway might fix what was broken. But that trip, it only made things worse. Robert noticed Chasey glued to her phone, and he started suspecting she was talking to someone else. That led to more fights and more tension. By the time they got back, Robert was done. He told people he couldn't do this anymore. He was exhausted and ready to let go, and then, not long after, he was murdered. At the Roy's City Police Department, where Detective Michael Burke sat her down for a proper interrogation. It was the middle of the night, 2:20 a.m., and it lasted 8 hours. At first, Chasey stuck to the story about her troubled marriage and her affair with Garza. She also described the night Robert was killed, claiming she saw a shadowy figure but had no idea who the shooter was. But Detective Burke pointed out that witnesses don't usually just walk away from a crime scene. That's when Chasey's story started to shift. A couple of hours in, she admitted Garza was involved. She said she had told him about Robert's anger issues and that Garza had come with her that night, supposedly just to talk to Robert outside a Jack in the Box. Then the details got even sketchier. Chasey admitted there was a shotgun in her car. Garza had put it there, but she claimed she hadn't noticed it at first because she was too distracted by her phone. She went on to say Garza told her to drive to County Road 25.95, saying he had to meet someone. But then she claimed Garza set up a trap. He told her to call Robert and lie, tell him her Jeep was stuck so he'd come to help. But the Jeep, turns out it wasn't stuck at all. The night Robert showed up, his wife immediately noticed something unusual. He was wearing the same cologne from their wedding day. He hadn't worn it in years. She made a joke about it and he chuckled. But within moments, Robert was walking straight toward his own death. As he headed to his Jeep, he suddenly shouted, "Stop!" According to his wife, he was then talking to none but Michael Garza. But later, she claimed she didn't want Garza talking to Robert, and her story kept changing. First, she said it was just a conversation between two men. Moments later, a gunshot rang out. Garza didn't say a word to her until after she had already called 911. And when she did, he grabbed her phone and smashed it on the ground. That alone raised suspicions, but prosecutor Jeff Kovach didn't buy her version of events either. He pointed out how neither of her stories really made sense. Investigators believed Robert's wife had lured him to that spot on purpose, to have him killed. But she denied it, of course, swearing she never planned or discussed anything like that. However, the next day, on September 10th, Chasey Poynter was arrested for conspiracy to commit murder. Her daughter was placed in the care of her mother while Chasey stuck to her story, claiming she had nothing to do with Robert's death. Meanwhile, Michael Garza, the man accused of pulling the trigger, was on the run. In his final days, Robert was exhausted. He was done with his marriage and ready to walk away. The day before he died, he had even reached out to a divorce attorney through Facebook, planning to leave Chasey, sell their house, and fight for custody of their daughter. And then just 24 hours later, he was dead. Naturally, many believed that was no coincidence. Chasey's real motivation? Money. She had convinced Robert to change his $685,000 life insurance policy, making her the sole beneficiary instead of their daughters. This wasn't some last-minute decision. She had set this up months earlier, back in April. And that wasn't all. Investigators found thousands of text messages between Chasey and several men: Danny Mims, Brad Golden, Sean Butcher, and Michael Garza. The messages made one thing clear: she had been searching for someone to take care of Robert. In the end, it looked like she had groomed Garza to do the dirty work. But no matter how much she denied it, the truth was already out there. Chasey knew exactly how to play her cards. She had a way of wrapping men around her finger, making them believe whatever she wanted them to. Prosecutors think that's exactly what she did, manipulated the men in her life to take action against her husband, Robert. She painted herself as the helpless victim, telling Michael Garza during a vacation that Robert was dangerous and would eventually come after her. That set Garza off, and he responded with some violent threats, but he wasn't the only one she had under her spell. Another one of her lovers, Brad Golden, described how Chasey practically lived at his place, feeding him story after story about Robert's so-called abuse. She even told him she'd been divorced since 2014, which was a complete lie. At first, Brad believed her, but something felt off. So he started asking around, neighbors, friends, and guess what? No one had ever seen any proof of the abuse she kept talking about. And she'd done the same thing with her ex-lovers, Sean Butcher and Danny Mims. In fact, just 8 days before Robert's murder, she texted one of them saying, "I wish he'd run out of air in a fire." If that wasn't chilling enough, she also sent a text that read, "I need him gone, gone." Danny wasn't having it and replied, "I'm not a magician." Chasey's response, "Well, I need one." It became clear to investigators that Chasey had been on a mission. She was actively looking for someone to kill Robert. The day before the murder, she sent Garza another text, "I've made up my mind." To prosecutors, that was all they needed to confirm she had set everything in motion. The night Robert was killed, Garza took off and he ran, but eventually he turned himself in and was charged. A few weeks later, a farmer plowing his field made a chilling discovery. A shotgun, still loaded, tossed near where Robert was shot. It was a Mossberg .835 automatic, and the shells inside matched the ones used in the murder. That gun, it was registered to Garza's brother, Matthew. With everything pointing to Garza and Chasey, the case was coming together. Investigators were convinced Chasey had set the whole thing up using Garza as her pawn. She had financial motives, and she wasn't shy about it. Even when she finally admitted to having an affair with Garza, she never let on that she had anything to do with Robert's death. Finally, then came July 10, 2018, Michael Garza's trial. He pleaded not guilty, but when he took the stand, he turned the spotlight on Chasey. He admitted to giving her his brother's gun, but swore he only did it because he thought she was in danger. He insisted he wasn't even at the crime scene, claiming he was at his family farm, tending to a sick cow named Oreo when Robert was shot, though the jury wasn't buying it. 10 days later, on July 20th, Garza was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 99 years behind bars. And as for Chasey, well, let's just say the woman who thought she could outsmart everyone found out the hard way. Lies can only take you this far. Once Garza was locked up, all eyes turned to Chasey Poynter. The prosecutors weren't buying the idea that she was just some innocent bystander. They believed she was the real mastermind, pulling the strings from the shadows. They said she wanted out of her marriage, and more importantly, she wanted the money that came with it. Her defense team also fought back, saying her affairs had nothing to do with the murder. They accused the prosecutors of using her personal life to make her look like a villain. According to them, Chasey never actually wanted her husband, Robert Poynter, dead. Garza acted on his own. As proof, they pointed to her 911 call, arguing that someone plotting a murder wouldn't immediately turn around and call the cops. But the prosecutors weren't buying it. They painted a chilling picture of Chasey, saying she showed no real remorse and, if anything, looked almost satisfied at the crime scene. They argued that Robert wouldn't have been at that spot unless Chasey lured him there, and she played a much bigger role in the whole thing than she wanted to admit. Chasey never took the stand, but the jury still heard her voice. Police had recorded interviews where she admitted she wanted out of the marriage and that Robert knew about her affairs. After a few hours of deliberation, the jury made their decision: guilty. Chasey Poynter was sentenced to life in prison with a slim chance at parole after 30 years. In the aftermath, Robert Poynter's life insurance was split between his 3 daughters. As for the young daughter Chasey and Robert had together, custody was divided between Chasey's parents and Robert's family. And just when it seemed like the case was finally closed, another arrest years later reopened old wounds, bringing the story back into the spotlight and leaving everyone wondering, was there more to this twisted tale than they had originally thought? What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. But this is nothing compared to what we have next, be it manipulation, horror, or brutality. This one is much blood-curdling and mysterious, much like Jack the Ripper. Click on this to watch. Subscribe to the channel for more. See you soon.